Imagine a galaxy on the brink of collapse, isolated civilizations, cosmic horrors lurking in the dark, and humanity shattered into billions of disconnected voices. Now imagine the mighty God Emperor of mankind staring into that chaos and deciding the best way to deal with it would be creating leaders of his own flesh and blood. Not just heroes or leaders. The Primarchs were forged in a laboratory from his very genetic material, shaped to be living weapons, perfect leaders, and symbols of everything humanity could one day become. Some were born with charisma strong enough to move armies, others with an almost supernatural beauty, and many developed abilities so unique that they echoed through every soldier in their legions. But what happens when beings designed to win any war begin fighting battles within themselves, and when those divine gifts start turning into curses? Today we touch the origin, the purpose, and the destiny of these legendary beings. Get ready, because the Emperor's sons are not mere bored aristocrats, but living weapons created to decide the future of the galaxy. Starting with Lionel Jonson, the son of the forest, Lion has a natural talent for hunting demons, and that comes straight from growing up on Caliban, a place where surviving meant learning how to track and kill massive monsters from a young age. He also carries an unbreakable spirit, both in terms of loyalty and in sheer resistance to chaos that could come from sharing the same genetic material as his father, a literal god, or from the strategic mindset he developed as a leader on Caliban. And of course, there's the inspiring presence he naturally radiates. But not just that, when Lion woke up in the 42nd millennium, he developed an ability called Forest Walk, basically a pocket dimension that lets him move around completely undetected. And even though he doesn't directly use psychic powers, the same psychic imprint he carries for being the Emperor's son ended up mutating in him, giving rise to this ability. It even caught him off guard when he woke up and realized he had it. Fulgrim is basically the walking definition of beautiful and knows how to use it. And on Chemos, where he landed and grew up, that kind of beauty actually meant something. Their society loved political maneuvering. And if someone looked perfect, well, congratulations, you just became prime material for strategic marriages. Fulgrim fit right into that world without even trying. But looks aside, his regeneration is on a whole different level. There's that famous moment when Perturabo absolutely wrecked him, completely smashed the bones of Fulgrim's pretty little face. And then all his crushed bones and mashed flesh just started healing right in front of him, fast enough that even Perturabo had to stop and watch his work be undone. Some people say that's just the Emperor's son's standard biology doing its thing. Others swear Slaanesh was already whispering in his ear and boosting his natural abilities. Honestly, it's one of those lore debates that never really ends. And moving on to the man himself, Perturabo. Perturabo was a bit different when it came to powers. From a very young age, he could see the overlap between reality and the warp. So he basically saw demons all the time, which obviously had a pretty negative impact on his personality. It made him way more closed off, rigid, and frustrated compared to the other Primarchs. Perturabo is a genius, no jokes here. He can look at any structure or blueprint, finished or not, and instantly spot every flaw. That alone makes him a monster when it comes to engineering and siegecraft. Another thing people often confuse with Angron's butcher's nails are the tubes attached to Perturabo's skull. But they're not the same thing at all. Those are part of something called a HUD, a specialized interface that enhances the way he perceives and analyzes battles. It's basically his own built-in tactical computer. Now moving on to Jaghatai Khan. Jaghatai is basically the swordsman straight out of your favorite manga. The guy's speed, strength, and precision reach a whole new level even by Primarch standards. The most common example people bring up is a war against the orcs where Jaghatai was moving so fast, cutting down orcs at such ridiculous speeds that the orcs just lost the will to fight. Yeah, the big bad green monsters dropping their weapons, and that's coming from orcs, creatures whose entire culture revolves around violence and constant fighting. But unlike your typical edgy tokusatsu swordsman, Jaghatai isn't petty or dramatic. He's actually extremely level-headed. He questioned a lot of the Emperor's decisions, and he was genuinely bothered by how many of his brothers ended up siding with Chaos Gods. So yeah, Jaghatai absolutely earns the based seal. Now let's move on to the blonde Viking himself. Besides having a modern-era battle tank named after him, Leman Russ carries the Canis Helix mutation, the genetic quirk that gives any soldier who shares his gene seed wolf-like traits, like especially heightened senses and predatory hunting instincts. Russ also has a certain affinity with the warp, but thanks to Fenrisian culture and the whole myth-laden aesthetic of the space wolves, they don't call it warp at all. To them, it's the power of ancient runes, mystical spirits, some ancestral force guiding their fate, and yada yada. But in Russ's case, there's nothing ancestral about it. It is the warp, straight up. So yeah, Russ has both a natural affinity and a natural resistance to it. Another important thing about Russ is that he's one of the few Primarchs the Emperor treated almost like an actual son rather than a tool. Russ served as the Emperor's executioner, the one sent to enforce imperial truth when diplomacy failed or when a brother had to be corrected. This gave him a unique place in the family dynamic, both feared and respected, but also painfully aware of the dirty work he was expected to do. And despite the barbarian Viking stereotype, Russ wasn't dumb at all. He was a brilliant tactician, especially when it came to asymmetrical warfare, ambushes, and rapid strike operations. The guy was basically a walking combination of mythic hero, apex predator, and military mastermind, wrapped in fur pelts, mead, and a lot of attitude. Rogal Dorn is the embodiment of sheer willpower. The kind of will that doesn't bend, doesn't break, and definitely doesn't ask for permission. Out of all the Primarchs, he's one of the few who actually gets it. He understands exactly what he is, not a demigod chasing glory, not a tortured philosopher, not a would-be emperor, but a tool, a weapon forged by the emperor for a very specific purpose. And instead of fighting that truth like so many of his brothers, Dorn embraces it and turns that brutal self-awareness into an unshakable strength. Konrad Curze, the Night Lord, was already broken by nature because of Nostramo, the morally rotten, crime-infested planet where he grew up. He had the ability to see the future, but only in fragmented, chaotic flashes. And these visions tore his mind apart piece by piece, eroding his sanity and damaging his cognitive stability even further. This curse was passed down to at least one of his sons, Talos Valkyrin, who suffered the same kind of prophetic hallucinations his father endured before his death. Curze even foresaw his own assassination and willingly allowed an agent of the Officio Assassinorum to carry out the deed. In his mind, it was the ultimate proof that his worldview, that all things end in inevitable darkness, was right. Curze also had a natural affinity for darkness itself. He could disappear into the shadows with supernatural ease, becoming effectively invisible during his hunts. Some sources even describe him as being able to manipulate fear on an instinctual level, making his presence alone enough to psychologically break his enemies before he ever touched them. And unlike many traitor Primarchs, Curze never claimed to serve the Chaos Gods. He didn't worship them, didn't pray to them, and didn't pledge loyalty to their cause. His fall was driven not by corruption, but by nihilism. Sanguinius. His appearance alone already tells you everything you need to know. The angel of the Imperium was born with a massive pair of wings, but here's the interesting part technically. His wings shouldn't be large enough to let him fly. Aerodynamically, they don't make sense. So his ability to take flight comes from his psychic affinity, which also allowed him to reach supersonic speeds when he really pushed himself. Sanguinius is clearly meant to be an angelic figure. Just as he possessed an almost supernatural level of empathy, he could also inspire overwhelming fear when provoked. There's a reason even hardened warriors described him as both awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time. On top of that, Sanguinius had the gift of foresight just like Curze. But unlike Curze's fragmented, brain-shattering visions, Sanguinius's precognition was far more stable and controlled. His visions often came in moments of clarity rather than violent psychic attacks, allowing him to understand the broader strokes of fate instead of being consumed by them. And of course, there's the greatest tragedy. Sanguinius foresaw his own death at the hands of Horus. He walked into that final duel fully aware that he would not leave it alive, and he went anyway. Because that's who Sanguinius was. The embodiment of hope and sacrifice, but also the willingness to face destiny without fear. Well, Ferrus Manus' time in the lore wasn't exactly long. Ferrus always showed a natural affinity for engineering and forging, probably the strongest mechanical talent among all the Primarchs. But his most iconic feature, of course, were his metallic hands made of the same necrodermis like material necrons are made of. This gave Ferrus absurd strength, durability, and heat resistance far beyond even other Primarchs. He gained this gift after defeating, or rather drowning, a giant metallic serpent in the magma rivers of Medusa, which caused the creature's liquid metal to fuse permanently to his forearms. Many believe this serpent was a fragment, which explains the connection to Necron material. Angron had a power that was literally ripped away from him. Originally, he possessed the psychic ability to absorb the pain of those around him, to take their suffering into himself and ease their agony. It was a form of extreme empathy, something incredibly rare among the Primarchs. But once the butcher's nails were hammered into his skull, that gift vanished. The implants tore apart the mental pathways that allowed him to empathize, replacing compassion with constant agony, rage, and bloodlust. From that moment on, Angron could no longer feel the pain of others, only the endless torment screaming inside his own mind. So Angron, instead of becoming a noble demigod, was effectively turned into a living weapon, a slab of rage and muscle forged for slaughter, less a Primarch and more a tortured engine of war. And of course his tragedy only deepened. Angron would eventually ascend to become a Daemon Prince of Khorne, the Blood God. But even then, it's debatable whether this ascension was a reward or simply another form of slavery. Guilliman is the most complete of all the Primarchs when it comes to powers and abilities. From the days of the Great Crusade all the way to the 42nd millennium, Guilliman has always possessed an incredibly strong talent for organization, logistics, and grand strategy, a direct reflection of his upbringing on Macragge. Because of that, he was almost always the most prepared commander on any battlefield. And a well-prepared army is stronger than any brute force assault, because proper preparation accounts for every possible outcome. Guilliman didn't just fight wars, he managed them like a scientist disassembling a problem until there was only one winning solution left. In the modern era, though, something new appeared, the Emperor's power projecting directly through Guilliman's armor and blade. After nearly being killed by Mortarion during the Plague Wars, the Emperor's presence surged through Guilliman, empowering him with a literal divine aura. With that influx of holy might, Guilliman banished Mortarion and Kugath straight back to Nurgle's garden. Some scholars argue this moment was the closest anyone has come to witnessing the Emperor acting directly in the galaxy since his enthronement on the Golden Throne. Despite all the well-known challenges, Guilliman has become the Imperium's greatest beacon of stability in the 42nd millennium, a strategist, a warrior, and now, whether he likes it or not, a prophet of the Emperor's will. Mortarion possessed an innate resistance to physical damage, an ability that also became a defining trait of his legion, the Death Guard. Personally, this is one of my favorite aspects of Mortarion because I find a slow, relentless advance far more terrifying than a fast, flashy strike. Even during his fight with Jaghatai, a true melee monster, Khan had to land far more hits than usual just to cause any meaningful damage and ended up exhausted. Mortarion also had a form to hidden his arrival. Normally, the presence of a Primarch can be sensed by soldiers on the battlefield because of the Emperor's DNA. It radiates a kind of psychic pressure of supernatural intensity that announces a demigod has arrived. But Mortarion had the ability to mask that presence. He could dampen or even suppress that aura, allowing him to approach without triggering the instinctive awe or fear that Primarchs usually project. Magnus is hands down the Primarch with the greatest affinity for warp manipulation. His psychic power was overwhelming even by Primarch standards, strong enough to literally shatter the Emperor's psychic wards around the Imperial Palace, which caused a small catastrophic demonic inconvenience. Magnus could also alter his size just like when he grew to titanic proportions to destroy a warlord-class titan with his bare hands. And he could also manipulate his physical appearance depending on who was looking at him. He could look noble, terrifying, or even angelic, all accordingly to the observer's expectations and Magnus's subtle psychic influence. Magnus also possessed an academic obsession with the warp. To him, it wasn't something to fear, it was a field of knowledge waiting to be mastered. His tragedy is that he genuinely believed he could navigate its dangers through sheer intellect and will. And of course, after the destruction of Prospero and his fall to Tzeentch, Magnus ascended as a Daemon Prince, gaining even greater warp control, but at the cost of becoming a literal slave to the Changer of Ways. Horus truly used to be a towering charismatic demigod. In Horus Rising, you can clearly see how he constantly uses charm and subtle manipulation to bend situations in his favor, whether he's dealing with his soldiers, his brothers, or even his enemies. Horus didn't command only through authority, he commanded through connection. People really wanted to follow him. He was also a great strategist, same level as Lion and Guilliman. Some even argue that before the heresy, Horus was the best all-around commander among the Primarchs. He balanced tactical instinct, long-term planning, and emotional intelligence in a way few others could. And this is what makes his fall so devastating. Horus wasn't just the greatest of them. He was the symbol of unity, the bridge between brothers, the one Primarch everyone believed in, including the God Emperor. Which is exactly why chaos targeted him. The brightest star became the darkest shadow, and his fall didn't just break the Imperium, it shattered the galaxy. Lorgar Aurelian possessed an incredibly powerful gift of persuasion. He could sway entire planets into adopting a new religion in shockingly short periods of time, and he wielded extremely potent psychic abilities as well. But the interesting part is that Lorgar's power wasn't psychic in the conventional sense. It was far more auric, more spiritual in nature. For example, Lorgar could literally see the soul of a person. He perceived the warp not just as energy or chaos, but as a realm of spiritual truths, symbols, and divine presence. He also radiated an almost holy aura of reverence that people around him could feel. Just through faith, conviction, and his overwhelming spiritual presence, he convinced Argel-Tal to journey into the Eye of Terror, a decision that would turn Argel-Tal into the first possessed space marine, merging his soul with a daemon and marking the beginning of the Word-Bearer's true descent. After the events on Monarchia and the Emperor's brutal reprimand, Lorgar's faith didn't die. It simply shifted toward the Chaos Gods, whom he saw as the true divinities the galaxy had been blind to. And once his belief aligned with theirs, Chaos found in Lorgar its most devoted prophet. In many ways, the heresy truly began with him, not with the rebellion of Horus, but with Lorgar's brand new worship. Vulkan is the perpetual Primarch, meaning he's simply immortal. No matter what happens to his body, Vulkan always comes back. For instance, Konrad Curze kept him locked in torture cells, forcing him to endure ages of suffering. No matter how many times he died, no matter how extreme the torment became, the giant always returned, resilient and unbroken. But Vulkan's power isn't limited to his immortality. He also possessed an extraordinary gift for forging, crafting masterwork weapons and artifacts on a level so refined that even other Primarchs desired it. Many of Vulkan's artifacts would later become relics capable of turning entire battles, from blades that channel solar fire to hammers that carry the weight of a dying star. Corvus Korax is the embodiment of stealth, the absolute pinnacle of the undetectable. He can become completely invisible in virtually any environment, even manipulating his own Primarch aura, that almost divine presence they all radiate, which I mentioned earlier. While other Primarchs look like beacons of power on the battlefield, Korax could simply vanish. The Primarch in black is also a beast in terms of direct combat, not afraid to trade blows with anyone. Korax can also transform into a true beast, a living shadow demon fueled by pure predatory wrath. He's even used this form to literally beat the hell out of Lorgar, proving that behind the brooding aesthetic lies an apex predator. But the crazy part is Korax still remains this way today. He became a creature twisted by the warp, not through corruption, but through his relentless hatred for chaos. He entered the warp as a hunter, and that's where he remains, a vengeful shadow and a monster stalking daemons within their own realm. His spirit of war against chaos simply cannot be contained. Alpharius and Omegon are twins whose powers revolve around pure deception. And I'm not talking about stealth or simply going unnoticed. I mean true deception, reality warping misdirection, the kind that makes you question your own senses, your own certainty, even your own identity. Their sons possess the ability to genuinely believe they are Alpharius. Yes, that's a real ability, a psychological imprint that comes directly from the influence the twin Primarchs exert on their legion. Identity becomes a weapon, confusion becomes strategy, and the Alpha Legion wields both better than anyone in the galaxy. The twins themselves also have a far more advanced ability to obscure their appearances, disguising themselves so perfectly that even other Primarchs can be fooled. The story of the Primarchs reveals far more than simple acts of war. It unveils a complex mosaic of gifts, tragedies, virtues, and flaws that shape not only each of them individually, but the fate of the entire galaxy. Each Primarch, molded both by the Emperor's genetic design and by the brutal circumstances of their home worlds, became the living embodiment of a facet of humanity. But above all, limitless potential for salvation or destruction. Their extraordinary abilities echoed through their legions, amplifying their strengths and their inner demons, and their choices, whether voluntary or forced, set off consequences that reverberated across millennia. In the end, the Primarchs are not merely the Emperor's sons, they are distorted reflections of everything humanity can become when touched by absolute power. And it's precisely this blend of glory and tragedy that makes their saga one of the most captivating in all of Warhammer 40k lore.